Historic political chaos engulfing South Korea as the country's president declares martial law only to lift the decree just hours later. The turmoil now rocking a major U.S. ally, catching officials right here in Washington by surprise. Our senior international correspondent, Will Ripley, has the latest.
South Korea's biggest political crisis in decades, ending almost as quickly as it began.
친애하는 국민 여러분.
President Yoon Suk-yeol vowing to overturn his surprise declaration of martial law hours after Parliament voted unanimously against it. South Korea's first declaration of military rule in more than 40 years, igniting massive protests in Seoul. Despite months of political gridlock, bitter clashes with opposition leaders, and mounting public frustration, almost nobody saw this coming.
This is an enormous overreaction by the president, to say the very least. But for him to escalate in this way is really, frankly, bizarre.
Chaos outside the National Assembly, inside an emergency session, Parliament voting unanimously, 190-0 to overturn martial law, just 150 minutes after Yoon's shocking order. The vote, a rare moment of unity in South Korea's deeply divided legislature. Opposition leaders described the president's move as an unprecedented assault on democracy.
Tanks, armoured personnel carriers, and soldiers with guns and knives will rule the country. The judicial system is suspended, and an emergency martial law regime, where soldiers deliver a summary judgment, has begun.
Veteran South Korean journalist Kenneth Choi says the nation is in collective shock.
Everybody's flabbergasted. The very essence of our democracy is probably come to a halt.
The road ahead, uncertain. President Yoon's popularity was already plummeting. Now, some are calling for him to resign. Underlying issues, political polarization, economic struggles, and public discontent remain unresolved. South Korea's democracy may have withstood this test, but serious questions remain. The immediate question, Wolf, as Asia wakes up on this now Wednesday morning here, is how long can President Yoon stay in office? There are these accusations of treason, these growing calls for his impeachment, and South Korea does have a long history of holding its leaders accountable. 4 former presidents have gone to jail after leaving office in less than 40 years of South Korea being a democracy. Wolf, a lot of people wondering if Yoon is going to be number 5.
Yeah, very serious development indeed with enormous ramifications. Will Ripley, thank you very much. I want to get some analysis right now. I want to bring in CNN's MJ Lee along with our military analyst, retired Colonel Cedric Leighton. We're also joined by Korea expert Victor Cha. He's the author of several books on the region, including his latest entitled, there you see the cover, The Black Box. And Victor, let me start with you. This was a stunningly fast turn of events by a president who's been embroiled in controversy now for some time, as you well know. Why did President Yoon do this?
Well, Wolf, I think the reason he did it was for reasons that we're very familiar with here in the United States. Political polarization, weaponization of instruments of government, social media demonization on both sides that led to complete gridlock in the legislature such that he could get nothing accomplished, including the budget for next year. And then I think in a fit of both frustration and anger, he declared this martial law completely unknown to his own people, unknown to the U.S. government for certain, and creating a lot of ripple effects throughout the region as well as in the U.S. government.
Important point. MJ, you're learning this all took the White House by complete surprise. Take us inside how the U.S. is responding to this crisis in South Korea.
Yeah, this took everyone in the Biden administration by complete surprise. Nobody was expecting this, whether it's the officials here in Washington or even the folks traveling with President Biden in Angola. You know, initially, the first few hours as these scenes were pouring in, clearly the White House was trying to sort of process what was going on, figure out what the White House's official reaction should be. And within the last hour or two, we actually got the first reaction from the White House responding to Yoon Yoon agreeing to lift martial law. This is what that statement said from an NSC spokesperson. We are relieved President Yoon has reversed course on his concerning declaration of martial law and respected the ROK National Assembly's vote to end it. Democracy is at the foundation of the U.S.-ROK alliance. We will continue to monitor the situation. I should say, Wolf, there has been no substantive and direct response to all of these events from President Biden himself. He really hasn't been engaging the media much while on this trip in Angola, particularly after the pardoning of his son Hunter. But we should say, for context, strengthening the U.S.-ROK alliance has been a big part of the president's foreign policy in the region. And President Yoon is somebody that he has had a number of occasions to see. So I do think there's going to be many folks here in the U.S. who are still eager to get that direct response from President Biden.
Colonel Layton, the Pentagon, as we all know, has nearly 30,000 U.S. military troops and other assets in South Korea right now. What will this mean for the U.S. position and for the alliances in the region?
Well, any instability, Wolf, in South Korea, of course, has major ramifications for our Indo-Pacific policies. And when it comes to Korea, it's basically a we will fight tonight kind of scenario that the U.S. forces are basically geared for, and that's a fight tonight against North Korea, of course. So the idea that there's any instability in South Korea kind of takes us back to the early 1980s, where this kind of stuff did happen. And of course, with the new way in which South Korea handles its democracy, that is something that not only the people didn't expect, but neither the South Korean nor the U.S. military expected it either. So it's a major issue for both, and the less stability there is in South Korea, the worse it gets for us to fulfill our policy goals.
And Victor, I wonder if you expect President Yoon of South Korea to be impeached. Where does the country go from here?
Well, it's a good question. I think on the one hand, he did the right thing, which was he declared a martial law. The legislature overruled him. And then after a few long hours, he decided to accede to the legislature. That is constitutionally what he's supposed to do. Ironically, though, even though he did the right thing, I think his future is very uncertain. Whether he'll be impeached or whether they'll have enough votes to impeach him, that's one question in the legislature. The other is whether there'll be street protests that call for his resignation. But he's not in a very good position now. As you said, Wolf, earlier, he was at 10% in terms of popularity already. So the future is quite uncertain for him, even though he probably did the right thing today to save democracy in Korea.